Great. Thank you, David. And I want to welcome everybody to our session this afternoon from the FACT committee. The FACT is the Faculty Administrator Collaboration Team. And what we are going to do today is try to give you an overview of who we are and what we have been doing, and then have ample amount of time for talking about where we might have opportunities to move forward in the future. Next slide. So this was a mission statement we've compiled some time ago when we were first forming. What we are really trying to do is to reduce administrative burden by taking advantage of the unique environment at the FDP. And it's an environment where paired groups from the institutions, these are the administrators and the faculty, both come together in essentially the same rooms. And that gives us an opportunity to have a dialogue about the institutional contributions to the administrative burden associated with research and how we might interact at our institutions to reduce that burden. Next slide. So we've had over the past several years, 8 to 10 institutions as our committee. They are represented here. You can see they span the United States from coast to coast and the central. We have different types, different sizes of institutions represented. And one thing to note is that we have from each institution a faculty representative and the administrative representative from the same institutions. Many of these folks are on the phone call today. In bold is myself and my administrative partner, Suzanne Allstat, who is our co-chair, our current co-chairs for the FACT committee. We are soliciting more people. If you are interested and can have representation as both a faculty rep and an admin rep, please let us know. Next slide. So here's the expectations of membership on our FACT committee. As I just mentioned, the institutions must join as a pair, one faculty rep, one administrator from the institution. In some cases, we've actually been able to get the data rep also participating, which has been actually a great bonus in some cases and what we've been trying to analyze. The institutions must be willing to share information, quantitative or qualitative information, and you'll hear more about how we've tried to compile some of this in a few minutes. The faculty and the administrative reps must both participate in our activities. Our activities include these FDP meetings, monthly working group phone calls, and some of our initiatives that we've done. I'll have more to say about that in a few minutes. Where we rely on feedback in particular about the different institutions coming from the reps. And finally, members both members must be willing to reach out to the faculty and administrators within their organization to help gather information about some of or to contribute to our FACT initiatives. Next slide. So now I want to go over sort of in a report out, sort of what we've been doing since we sort of formed back in 2018. And we're referring to those days, 2018 to 2020, which I guess are pre-COVID mostly, but they're also phase one of our activities. And we started by trying to ask our reps to collect some quantitative and qualitative feedback at their institutions. And what we kind of came up with was a couple of things. One is that the institutions really kind of varied in how they report information or how they gather information. They also varied a lot in the processes associated with pre-award and post-award, whether in some cases where they had centralized or decentralized. Some approvals came before submission, some came after submission. So there's a lot of differences, and it was difficult to actually compile this in a quantitative sense, but it gave us an idea that there were a lot of lots of information to be garnered from this. The other thing we've figured out from some of this is that administrators and PIs, faculty, use different terminology to describe their contributions to research. Sort of from the faculty perspective, we had a lot of, I and me, and from the administrative perspective, we had a lot of we and our. So there's certainly different contributions that we think we bring to the table in terms of our independent careers versus our institutional roles. And then we also polled both the faculty and the administrators about contributions to institutional policies. What role do you have in the institutional policy? And what we figured out as neither the faculty nor the research administrators seem to be involved in making research policies at the institutions. Again, speaking to where are these policies coming from, how much of this is top-down policy, and how much is it connected to the actual work being done, and is that contributing to the overall burden? At about the same time, the workload survey was being done, the faculty workload survey, and those results were coming out. And one of the things that sort of struck us at that time was the notion that whether or not an institution was fostering a culture of trust in research and in researchers seemed to be associated with whether or not there was higher or lower administrative burden, in particular those institutions that had more trust in research or had a higher rating for culture of trust had a lower burden associated with their research compared to those where it was felt there was less trust, less of a culture of trust. So that struck us as kind of interesting in light of what we were seeing as these institutional variables. So with that, next slide, we started our phase 2. And this started around 2020. And with phase 2, we began to try to explore this issue of institutional differences and their contribution to the administrative burden. And we also started using a couple of tools, in particular thought exchange, to sort of do not supposed to say survey, crowdsource type of analyses. And many of you may have participated in some of those thought exchanges that we did. The first thing we did was we sort of polled our institutions about trust. What is it you think of when you think of trust in research? And what constitutes this culture of trust? And we came up with some things that actually you're going to see are really a foundation for each of the things we've done. Transparency and effective communication just came up over and over as one of the top things. That is to say, we've got to have really good communication across researchers and the administration to build that trust. Familiarity was a big one, knowing who you're interacting with. Competency, fairness, and accountability was a big one. Engagement, and then valuing and supporting each other, all led to a culture of trust. The second thing we did was a thought exchange, taking, I guess, in some way, an advantage of our current pandemic as a natural experiment and as something that has really put a stress on the system. And I think therefore it's allowed for an opportunity to assess different weaknesses and strengths in that system. So we used the thought exchange, polled widely, to figure out what things were really important in that response and whether or not you were able to continue or maintain a successful research program, or whether it was more of a stressful situation. And same types of things sort of hit up. One of the things, of course, was flexibility and adaptability. How well were you able to move to a remote type or virtual setting? Did you have the resources for that? Communication and relationships. We asked about those and maintaining those. And that sort of came up on a two-way type street. Our virtual interactions, a lot of times allowed for more interaction than in person. It was easier. It was, you could just, instead of picking up the phone or trying to run down the hallway, you hop on a Zoom or Teams call and you're right there. On the flip side, you had boundaries that were difficult to set between work, life. Your living room is your office. When is it your office? When you take those calls? And of course, the infrastructure and resources. What's available? Does your work staff have to use their own computers? Do they have the appropriate internet connections to be remote? Does your institution have the ability to support that from security points of view and software support? So all of these things came together to show where institutional variables had differences in supporting the research enterprise. And then our most recent thought exchange related to, well, what then as a faculty member or research administrator can I do to try to improve this interaction between faculty and administration? And what we garnered from that was there were several things that came to the top. One is increase understanding and appreciation. That is, we need to educate each other about what we do, what we think we contribute to the research enterprise, and we need to be appreciative of that. Second thing was increase interactions and, quote, reaching out. That term came up, those actual two words together came up a lot. And it relates back to that familiarity. We really want to know each other. There was a lot of suggestions regarding attending, having admin people attending faculty meetings, having faculty reach out to their administrative people very early in a planning process. And then we had improved processes and timeliness. Some of that came to resources. Some of that came to value. Do we value each other's times? Or do we think weekends belong to me, and therefore I expect everybody else to respond on my time clock? A lot of that is sort of what came out of our most recent thing. And I think this sort of sets the framework for a discussion going forward. And next slide. Because there's a lot of implications from what we have been looking at. First is that, and this was consistent across the board, when you really...
By the Administration of Energy Saving, the state has now...
Sorry. Okay, so that wasn't me. So that we have faculty and administrators, the research administrators that support them, over and over said they were moving towards the same goal. They really did support each other. They both wanted what was best for research. So we have a good interaction here that needs to be fostered. Faculty and research administrators are a powerful force for institutional change. We need to be involved. We're the ones that do the research. We need to have a voice. And I think when we get together, success goes up. And I think that comes back to that trust issue. Institutional processes that need to be changed are really not limited to faculty and research administrators. There's a higher level that needs to be engaged, more institutional transparency in policy making, more feedback, if you will, from those that those policies are going to affect. And then that brings me to the last, triangulated relationships between faculty, research administrators, and institutional leadership are necessary for creating policy change. And that, that's not just faculty, institutional leaders, or research administrators or institutional leaders, but your PIs and the research administrators that support them, together with the institutional leadership, presumably, who are setting these policies. Okay, next slide. So with this background, we are looking forward in terms of how can we capitalize on this? How can we move this discussion further and really make an impact on the administrative burden at our institutions? So first is we still have, this unique environment of the FDP. We want to continue to utilize that environment to understand and enhance faculty administrator collaboration. We want to utilize the feedback provided by FDP member organizations to help inform best practices that will reduce administrative burdens at our different types of institutions by improving faculty administrator collaborations at those institutions. And we want to develop demonstrations and activities that focus on improving the institutional faculty interactions with the goal of reducing burden association with federally funded research. Next slide. So that gives you an overview of where we've been and what we've sort of been getting and where we want to go. One of the things we've been thinking about is how we can best achieve these goals in terms of a committee and in terms within the FDP, where we can undertake initiatives, demonstrations, if you will, that are aligned with the FDP mission of reducing administrative burden associated with federally funded research. And we would like to hear from folks. We've got a committee here, the entire fact committee, to discuss this. But in doing so, we want to really hear what you think are the priorities in trying to use this type of an approach institutionally for reducing burden. And with that, I'm going to ask that the FAC members, if they're present, go ahead and turn on their cameras. And then we can have a discussion. I think you will have to raise your hand, I believe. And we have somebody monitoring, or you can post in the chat room. And if you don't, then I will babble on some more about some things we've talked about. So do we have anybody with questions, comments that they want to hear about what we were doing, or suggestions on where we can go? Don't be bashful.
My hand's raised. I don't know if you can hear me.
Mark, sorry.
I'm behind you, Mark.
Okay. Just to get the discussion started. Start my video. Sorry about that. Hello. Lower my hand. Just to get the discussion started, I'd like to suggest that the focus on reducing burden is limited, that a focus on achieving success.
Uh-oh, Mark, you froze.
On what leads to successful institutional research endeavors is equally, if not more. Can you hear me?
I can't hear you now. You froze there for a minute.
Can't.
I can't.
Okay, you can. What I was
So we
saying
lost
was,
you. I think what you were getting at, Mark, is that we need to broaden focus to be beyond administrative burden and really consider success. One measure of success, increased institutional success in research. Is that?
you're right. Yeah. What at an institution. Right.
Yeah. Okay. So I think I got that out of what you said. So I think that is really good. So obviously, if we're looking at institutional contributors of burden, we probably need to pair that. Again, that comes back to institutions contributing information, metrics of success at those institutions, right? Which really relates to success with research, enterprise growth, and funding growth and resources. So, I mean,
And societal impact.
And societal impact. A little different, more difficult to measure, but yes, probably most important. So I think we heard at the faculty meeting the other day, one of the things that's coming up is the next faculty workload survey. I don't know if people are on that committee, but one of the topics was the notion of institutional reports on that. And I, for one, think that's kind of very important. It was very important and helpful for the FACT committee to understand some of our institutional variability. But I guess one thing would be, what do people think? Have people use those institutional reports at their home institution to look at what's going on over time within their own institution? Yes, no? For those, okay, we got a comment there. All right, for those of us in medical schools, the success that faculty are evaluated on is how much of your salary is being covered by your extramural funds. Yes. That is a measure of individual success for sure, or job stability for those of us in medical schools. And at Temple, we rely on institutional awards for benchmarking. So, and then small institutions do not get individual reports, but we can look at variability in the aggregate. So it sounds like there are some opportunities, and I don't know if salary support was part of the survey, but that is certainly a metric of institutional success, if you will, in research, is what percent of research salary is covered. That's pretty interesting metric to try to have to try to gather. And although I agree, Mark, it is kind of a sad one.
So early on, one of our thought exchanges, we looked at what each institution considered to be a measure of success. And while individuals were able to articulate what for them they considered to be research success, nobody seems to know what their institution considered a measure of success. And, you know, we can, obviously, we see a couple of things here in the chat, such as the, you know, how much of your salary is covered by extramural funding, but there was a huge lack of understanding on the part of the individuals who took part in that thought exchange as to what research success at their institutions actually meant.
And I think that's a good point, because it seems that even within our institution, as the upper administration changes, so too does that institutional metric of success. Yet I think, and you know, I think for many of us, the individual metric of success really does come down to whether we're funded or not and how much. So I see a hand up, David.
Yeah, this is David Pollock at UAB. I put the comment about the extramural funds and salary coverage, but I think there's really two questions, because it's really going to be hard for the faculty member to be motivated to reach for whatever the institutional goal is with this big looming dominant factor of I've got to bring in grant money, or I risk losing my lab, I risk cutting my salary and things like that. And then my interactions with the administration is they're not even on the same page, because we have some schools that their goal is to get more faculty involved in research. And that's what they view. And other schools, are our research dollars going up every year? Those are two different things. And so even within the administration, they're not on the same page. And I don't know how but as long as the faculty are measured by their grant funds, I guess secondarily high impact publications, it's going to be really difficult to all get on the same boat and row the same direction.
So I think one thing, I don't disagree with that. And I think it's really important and I know we've got quite a few folks on here that are going to be both faculty and others that are research admin, that when we looked at research admin administrators, those that we interact with on our grants directly, they were very motivated along the same type of success that David was just alluding to. They saw our success as their individual success. And I think something, when we say administration, we have to be careful about who we're talking about, or what level we're talking about. A lot of the surveys we've done really were done at the level of the research administrators you would have in your department and interact with for your pre and post award, not necessarily the administrators who are deciding policy and having vice something in their name.
I have a lot of interesting faculty workload survey comments in the chat. I do see a hand up.
Yes,
So
John.
John Leonard, if you would like to go ahead and take the mic.
Well, thank you. I'm trying to turn my screen on, but it tells me I'm disabled. So you get to look at my little cartoon figure.
It's a cute.
Okay, I gotta start here. I think we could maybe move this in a different direction. I'm a faculty member and I'm partnering with a research administrator. And what we've been focusing on trying to reduce faculty burden is aligning the job descriptions of the research administrators with the needs of the faculty within a particular department, school, or college. One of the initiatives that we want to undertake at my university is to grow our number of large research proposals. And to do that, our faculty need additional assistance on the pre-award side in gathering all the materials from the different PIs, stacking and sorting all the paperwork that needs to be sorted, checking through the RFP to make sure that we're being responsive to all the sections. There's a lot of mechanical things that are going on. Another piece that faculty struggle with is once the project gets going, keeping up with all the requirements with respect to reporting, both financial and technical and everything else. And so I think what would be very useful for this group to undertake is to gather what model job descriptions that you're using at your universities that could be shared, maybe put into a big pile that people could look at to help universities and help even within a particular university, different schools and colleges streamline and unify what these jobs are. Faculty have very specific requirements and what they think are the appropriate needs to work on a project. They'd like somebody with a PhD in the domain they're doing research in. Maybe there are people with PhDs in the domain they want to search in that don't want to be professors and don't want to be research faculty, but would like to be research staff. And they could have one foot both in the research domain world and in the research administration world to be that bridge so that the communications are more streamlined, the paperwork that's gathered is more streamlined. So I would propose perhaps some really low-hanging fruit is to begin a project amongst each of the pairs to define what those job descriptions that bridge across both roles would look like. And then as a group, we collectively put them in a pile and begin to tease out similarities and differences to perhaps define what a new job category would be, which is a technical research administrator or research science administrator or something like that, that would actually be able to take off some of the pressure from the faculty and do it in a way that we don't tee off all the administrative systems.
Yeah, we actually have had conversations about administrative burden, and we focus on faculty administrative burden, And then the notion becomes, what about total burden? I mean, is that burden going up or down with the faculty, or is it just being offloaded onto somebody else? But I like, it's an interesting component from the perspective of institutional variability. And that is to say, because this did come up in some of our thought exchanges, I believe, making sure expertise, if you will, are paired appropriately. And the difficulties doing that from a centralized research administrative setup versus a more distributed support from research admin. I like, boy, the texts keep going by. Mark had commented on something about find the parameters and scope of existing measures of success as a potential activity, to the best that we could, and they're known by our pairs, and attempt to figure out if there's a way we could come up with at the national level, how to measure these. Oh man, you just moved again. To focus them as measures across the board, so we can impact the collaborative effort. And then he asked a good question: do administrators and faculty want the same measures? I think that comes back to the question of which administrators are you asking? I would think Suzanne would want the measures that I have in mind for success to count, but overseeing a division of research admin, it would be me and, I don't know, 200 other researchers that would have the same metrics. So
Got a hand raised, so I'm gonna call on Devita to unmute, please, ma'am.
Oh, I think someone mentioned it earlier, but I just wanted to ask, or even place this in front of you all, particularly what Dr. Leonard was saying. Is it possible to make universal metrics, or is there possible to make what you were saying about having a liaison? Is it possible to be able to establish something that is a model for all universities, something that we, of course, can modify depending on where we are?
So that is a
Good
complex question, I would say. I think that will be difficult because, I mean, there will be some metrics that will be universal, our funding rates, success rates, and number of grants, number of researchers. But I think when you come down to it, we have a lot of differences between institutions. And even in the faculty workload survey, as I recall, the amount of burden associated with the different types of research varied tremendously. So the types of research we would face in an academic medical center would be very different than in a school of engineering. So you're going to be comparing particularly complicated types of things, but I think there should be some universal metrics, and maybe that's one of the things we should focus on trying to define. What would constitute a universal metric? All right, and I don't have, can't read these fast enough, but Michelle Masucci is putting in a lot of good information about what has been done in the faculty workload survey and some of the things being discussed. So if you don't have your chat pulled up, I think there's some good information in there. Because it does sound like they are looking at some of these metrics or potential metrics to try to pull out.
Okay. Kelly's got his hand raised. Kelly Shaver, one of our fact members. If you want to unmute.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm at the College of Charleston, as is my partner, Susan Anderson. And one of the things that I certainly value very much from our participation in FACT is precisely the institutional differences that we uncover at the level that we're working. I contrast that with what happens in the plenary session where there is a federal update. You won't find any institutional differences addressed by any of the feds in any of those sessions. They pretty much have to assume that a university is a university is a university with or without a medical school, with or without a graduate program, that they're all the same. Well, we know better. And the beauty of fact is that regardless of the content that we consider, we have been very careful all the way through our work to make sure that we recognize institutional differences in structure when we're talking about content. And I wouldn't want that distinction to be lost in the wash.
Thank you, Kelly. Yes, I think, that is really, I think the niche that fact has sort of found itself is that, we are where we can try to bring together these pairs and see what the institutional contributors are at the various institutions. And, I think, part of that came from the workload survey that showed there are institutional differences, types of institutions, size of institution, resources that an institution has. And sometimes they don't always track the way you would think they do, but certainly it seems to be easier to reduce faculty burden when you have a lot of money at your institution, a lot of resources. Okay, why? What's the best use of that? And what can other institutions that don't have those resources do to build those resources? What are that money supplying that's really reducing that burden? If you don't do human subjects research, IRB related burden may not be a driving metric you want to look at. And you're right, when we tried to compare, because we did, one of the things the fact committee did do was we all got our institutional workload surveys and started reviewing them and comparing them. And we started that in the concept of trust and figured out that we were probably both a small group and probably a self-selected group for places that have a high degree of trust. But that trying to correlate, and I think that, if we were to talk, and I hope we can move forward on and trying to turn this into what we can do going forward, bringing some of what we're learning about these interactions, centralized, decentralized, and bringing that back to, that concept of the information we're gathering in the workload survey would be great. And then we have a metric that we can use to see if we're actually having an impact on that burden.
Got another few really good comments in the chat section. One has to do with assistant or associate deans or chairs kind of facilitating that relationship between faculty and research administrators. I think that's one of those, Steve, you had mentioned earlier, even just administrators going to faculty meetings. So that's like something that's a very simple demonstration that we can do. So as we continue, we only have about 20 more minutes left. Let's kind of focus on some of these demonstrations that we can do, like the great idea with the pulling together the job descriptions and putting together some metrics that might not necessarily be universal, but can be tailored to our different types of groups. Another couple of comments, we've been talking a lot about how rich your institution is means how much staff you can have, how much different kinds of things you can do. So David Pollock says that the cap on the administrative part really keeps the staff number down in our research offices. And then Kurt mentions the possibility of hybrid employees that might be good. And of course, we get to the flip side of that, where faculty want to have these continuing relationships with their administrators. They don't want to necessarily be having to hop back and forth between people. Federal sponsors are mentioned, and then Susan mentions the guidance with the NSPM 33. So there could be more opportunities for us to collaborate together and work with federal agencies, which is another aspect of fact that all of the members have wanted to do, and we've kind of struggled with some ways to make that happen.
Another comment just came in about reconciling institutional policies across units, even within an institution. We're talking about harmonization at the federal level. We'll wait and see on that one, but how about harmonization even at an institutional level? Might be something, if we really wanted to take a look about, what variables institutions put up, having different policies, or shall we say practices that sort of get conflated to policy, might be something to think about. So I do kind of like the idea of about gathering some of this information. And Susan, I think the implementation of the National Security Presidential Memorandum, having, forget what poll it was in, but aware of it, but not having read it. But just hearing about it sounds like there's going to be a lot of potential for exploring how that's going to affect different institutions because of the reporting that's going to be done. So that's an interesting idea. Should an effort be made to determine what faculty effort could also be sorted by staff, what expertise, ratio of support needed actually available to the faculty. So that's an interesting concept Wesley just posted. One of the things that came out of our original quantitative analysis was not all institutions report staff effort, how this research effort is being distributed in the same way, on the same lines. So we found it very difficult to start comparing. I know Jason, I think, and David Reed, if he's here, they were capitalized on some of those reports from their own institution and made good use of it, comparing across time. But that's another kind of thing that is really difficult in trying to assess how or the nature of this burden, just using numbers across institutions. So Lynette has brought up something about developing best practices, and this is something that's come up. And I guess it's a good start. We've got some information about things that do work or seem to work in terms of building familiarity, building timeliness, those kinds of things. Is there some sort of white paper, and what would that white paper look like given the diversity of institutions? How would that look if we were to present something like that?
So let's pop back up to Alice's comment. Do any of our organizations offer professional development for associate deans of research, kind of like what your job is, that have worked at other places? So if we're going to expect or encourage assistant deans, associate deans, whatever it is, to kind of be that liaison, it would be really good to have some examples of how the heck do you do that. That's a really good point, Alice. Thank you.
Yeah, I would love to, I think there's expertise in this room that could help a new associate dean for research get up to speed. I've been in that role, and there wasn't anything years ago when I did it.
Trial by fire.
Well, and I think I would argue that, especially when those roles rotate, by the time you figure out what's useful at your institution in your college to reduce burden and help faculty, you're often out of the role. But I think there's, is there something that the FACT group could pull together to provide that sort of practical development?
It's an interesting thought. It relates to one of the other types of things that we had talked about. I don't know if Larry Sutter's on the line, but he brought it up, and the possibility of a exchange program where pairs from one institution visit another institution to figure out, what are you doing different, to really get a better sense for what's working at their institution that's not working at ours. And is there some mechanism where we can look at and match into pairs that could do that kind of exchange?
Or just, have somebody that you can call to ask, or that you can post a question and get an honest or uncensored answer.
An expertise kind of mentoring thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I could jump in, the Engineering Research Council of ASEE hosts an annual meeting specifically for Associate Deans of Research. That group, the Engineering Research Council, really views itself as the repository of Associate Deans for Research institutional knowledge. This event, even though it's put on by American Society of Engineering Education, it's open to anyone that's an Associate Dean for Research, and we've even had non-Associate Deans for Research show up. And the program, it's a depending on what year it is, a day and a half long or 2 days long. Last year during COVID, we would have it over several weeks where we'd have 3 hours a week of meetings. And the intent is to focus on issues that are relevant today. And so we develop a program custom to what we've seen happen nationally at the federal agencies and things. And then we provide a lot of peer discussions with the Associate Deans for Research. We recognize the turnover in this job, more than anything else, is crazy. Associate Deans for Research usually last 18 months to 2 years, and then they're off to be a dean somewhere. And so it's keeping continuity within that position is very difficult. And it seems like everybody's constantly relearning your job. And so I would recommend the program. I don't believe has been formally announced yet or posted, but once I find some information, I'll share it back with this group. And then you can share it with both others on your campus, Associate Deans for Research. I found it to be incredibly useful. And every year I go, I learn something new about the job of Associate Dean for Research.
Great, thank you. Yes, I think, Michelle reminded me, we had Jason Carter and Robert present at one of our meetings. There's an APLU group that aspiring vice presidents of research, VPRs, would get together and in a sense be mentored at and share experience. So there are some of those, but it sounds like maybe just gathering what those resources are would be a good thing to provide.
Segue, that is the comment that Lynette made. Let's get FACT and work on pulling all of these resources that we've been discussing together. And we could even have a subcommittee to reach out to those groups and talk to them about what FACT is doing. The chat is being saved. All of these wonderful ideas that we have not had time to discuss in a very short time together today will be saved and recorded, and we will make those part of our continuing FACT discussions.
Good, because I haven't had a chance to even read them yet. So some great discussions. it sounds like
Yeah.
part of what's
Crazy.
coming up, and I'm hearing over and over, is that it would be good for FACT to take some of what we've learned and try to turn it into resources that people can refer to, be it resources for types of expertise, job description, a resource of job descriptions that might be used for different types of not technical, that was the suggestion, types of research support, admin support positions. And then how, what else do we have? Metrics. What types of metrics might be used at individual institutions, and figure out what might be common as a way of picturing what could be metrics of success for more across the board versus at different types of institutions. Am I missing things? Are there other types of activities? We have the ability to use thought exchange. We've got in on that pretty early and really like the ability that it shows in gathering information from large groups. Are there different types of, I keep wanting to call them surveys, but crowdsourcing type activities that people can think of?
Robin Sear put an excellent idea, and this is something that we've talked about with our natural experiment over the years. And it has to do with the admin are mostly remote while the faculty are on campus. And for us to, there's a lot of different things we can look at with that, just to continue on. I see Joan's got her hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to talk about what Steve was referring to as the resource that we could possibly develop for either best processes, types of metrics, and also best practices on communication ideas, right? So one of the things that we learned really early on is that we all do things differently, and we do them differently for good reasons. But as you start to, rather than dig deep, we just went higher and said, okay, what are the high level things that we can recommend to people that will improve the trust and improve the collaboration and reduce the administrative burden? And that whole idea about effective communication and best ways to communicate, and it's different for everyone, but here are the successful, ways to communicate that we've seen in practice.
I like that, John, because that, no matter how we sliced it, when it came down to bettering the faculty admin interaction, collaboration, top of the list, and no matter how we surveyed it, was communication.
And it actually came out in a session yesterday with Lynette, when we were had all these research administration committee ideas coming out, and I think it was Alice who said, okay, I'm a faculty member, I don't even know what you're talking about right now, right? So we have to better communicate what it is that we're doing and show how that impacts what the faculty is doing and why it's important that we deal with this issue or whatever.
Right. Yes, I definitely agree with that one.
I want to give a shout out to the person who was speaking. I don't remember who it was, but I suddenly understood what a troublesome clause was. Thank you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I thought I knew what troublesome clauses were, but now I know better. Yes. And Lynette, and clearly that over and over again. Admin work, yeah. And I think this, brought us back, I think Alicia brought us back to the concept of, we got to be cognizant of reducing burden, not just on the faculty, but overall burden associated with research. And it's one thing to allow it to continuously increase as long as you have resources to dump it on something, but it seems like those resources tend to come and go, usually go more than not, and that just puts the burden back someplace else. We need a faculty and research administrator dictionary.
Yeah,
Yes.
so who wants to get in on getting that published right now? Yeah.
Acronyms are us. Yes, that could help from a faculty point of view. It took probably 2 years of attending FDP before I understood half of the terms being thrown around in some of the sessions. So that could be handy.
And Lynette's got her hand raised.
At the university.
Lynette, you want to go ahead and unmute?
Yep.
So Shauna, that just to address this is that came out of the faculty workload survey from 2018, and I think Michelle posted those in links to those. So you can actually find that in that survey report.
Sorry, Lynette, go ahead. We all got excited there for a second.
No, I just wanted to say that the stuff we talked about in the research admin session yesterday, the acronyms and being really conscious of speaking to faculty in a way that can be, best understood. We're already taking that away, and I think it might be a thing FACT can do, maybe in collaboration with the communications group, so that each time, we're putting together our slides or putting together our sessions. And, I've been doing this for years and I still have to remind myself, we'll have like a standard way that each session can be reviewed and gone through, or whatnot. Maybe FACT can look, or we can have a faculty committee that, looks at slides and says, yeah, we don't understand anything in there. Try again, spell out your acronyms, start at the beginning and explaining what it is your session or topic is about, and how it affects faculty and things like that. So anyways, just wanted to say we're already taking that as an action item.
Great. So let's see, there is a comment. I'm trying to follow this back up. Echoing Carmen's, one of the biggest difficulties, it's back to faculty. There are some faculty who have no administrative help at all. And then you got where do those tasks get distributed, which is a tough thing. That actually came out too. And that comes back to the resources, I think. And how do you capture that as an institutional variability in that survey, well, either from the survey or associated with administrative burden. That was one of the a big institutional variability, was how much support does an institution have and at what level. And at the end of the day, faculty want more time to think about and do science, to make discoveries, have an impact, less time in compliance and navigating changes in policy. I will really echo that change in policy. There's nothing like getting used to doing something, and now it's a full-time job, it seems, just following the changes that keep rolling out. And again, I don't know what we would do without the research administrators doing that, but that's an interesting thing. I don't know how that gets factored into those changes, is how much of an impact that will, just the change itself, let alone what they're changing to, will cause. I'm not sure how we would turn that into a survey, but that is clearly a cause for everybody to have more burden. Heather, frequently asked questions are not doing any waiting for someone to have a question.
We are about 30 seconds from running out of time.
Oh, well, okay. In that case, get your chats in quick so we can save them. This, I think, has been enlightening. I think we've got some suggestions for some resources that we might want to work on as a committee, and looking at different institutions and how the different institutions make these things available. We will get busy on that starting next month, and see what kind of progress we can make. I want to thank you all. I want to thank the FACT committee members who've chimed in and helped over the past several years, Suzanne, and thank you all for attending and making the suggestions.